Okay, hi. How is everybody? We are going to be talking about VDPs, MAPs, and MDAs today. And the thing I wanted to start with first is MDA and what an MDA is and what does it mean to us. So that's like the beginning of this thing. And I'm going to go in order on the approach plate. The first thing we hit is the MDA. So MDA, we know, is the minimum descent altitude, right? And it's depicted like this on the profile view, right? So your MDA is drawn with this little leg here. But in reality, you could be a helicopter, okay? And this is where people get this messed up. You could be a helicopter. As soon as you hit your final approach fix, you are actually safe to immediately go straight down to your MDA altitude, okay? You don't have to wait. You don't have to go on a glide path to get there. Now, it is recommended that you don't dive and drive. That's what they call that, where you dive and drive. That's a recommendation that you make it nice and gentle. I would argue that there are times that you might want to dive and drive, get below the weather real quick to try to find the airport, certain things. We're not going to talk about that. But I wanted to talk about how that MDA altitude actually goes all the way back. Okay, even though they've drawn it with the little VDP caret. Is that making sense?
Yes. Is that irrelevant to precision or non-precision?
It is only non-precision, right? So precision, so we're talking all non-precision today. MDA is only non-precision. When it comes to VDPs, they're only depicted for straight-in. So if you have a circling only approach, you're not going to see a VDP. If you're seeing a circling only approach, you'll see an MDA, but no VDP. But yes, this is non-precision only because of precision. And I do have, no, I'll have to show you that in a little bit. But yeah, so non-precision only. If you're on a precision approach, specifically flying a precision approach, and you get off glide path, then you're going to have to go missed approach. Or you do have the option, if you're still above MDA altitude, you could transition to a non-precision approach. Okay, so you know what I mean. So you just go so let's say you're off your glide path. As long as you don't go below your MDA, just go to your MDA, level off, and now just turn it into a non-precision approach at that point. Okay. Hopefully that's not too confusing the way I put that. Okay, so this is important to understand before we go on, right? So that altitude goes all the way back to your final approach fix. All right, so now I'm going to do some screen share stuff. So bear with me while I get that worked out. All right, so you can see this North Las Vegas, which is VGT, RNAV GPS runway 12 approach. And this is actually why I started this today, was because there was a Facebook question somebody had asked about this specific approach. And they wanted to know, he looked at this and saw the VDP, and the VDP is 1.2 miles. Can you guys see that okay, or do I need to make it bigger? I can make it bigger.
I'm just on an iPad mini, so that's why it's small.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. So you can see that VDP, the little V, and you can see that it's 1.2 miles from the end of the runway. So his question was, if I am after the VDP, and then all of a sudden I get the runway in sight, do I have to go missed approach, or can I just land? And that's the big question everybody always talks about. Like, do I have to descend at my VDP? Well, the book answer is no, you don't have to descend at the VDP, right? The VDP is there to assist pilots to pick the right altitudes, to pick the right descent point, if that's the right way to do it. But you don't have to. Now, I just explained that you could be down well before the VDP, right? So if you get down well before the VDP, and then drive into the VDP, then you would need to descend again. That's why they recommend trying to make that one gentle glide slope all the way down, so that you're not going down and then leveling off and then going down with a bunch of power changes, but there's nothing against it to do that either. Okay, so what is a VDP? It's a visual descent point. But what's important here is, where is that VDP coming from? What is that calculated off of? How are they getting that number? So a VDP, on this approach plate, you've got essentially two, we're going to ignore the circling part, two different heights above touchdown. So if you look at the LP MDA and the LNAV MDA, you'll see 2620-1. The 2620 is the MSL altitude that you would be flying. But that 415 and 615, that's your height above touchdown. That's how high above the ground you are. So if one person's at 415 and the other person's at 615, your VDP is going to be different, right? So does that make sense? I know you can't see me in the screen very well. But let me stop sharing here for a second and try to draw this out. Hopefully that makes me big enough for you to understand. Okay. So you've got this approach. One person is at 615 above the ground, and the other person is at 415 above the ground, right? You got that runway, and then you've got a 3-degree glide slope. This distance here is going to be different than this distance here.
Yep.
Right? So when they have a VDP depicted on that approach plate, which one is it? Is this 1.2 or is this 1.2? Well, the ones that are on the approach path or on the approach plates are always for the lower one. So right off the bat, if you're flying a higher MDA, the VDP isn't going to be perfectly accurate anyway. It's only if you're on the lowest of the approaches. We lost Lisa, but that's all right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna get into a little bit of math here. I hate doing the math because it gets complicated, but we're gonna do a little bit of math. Here's how this works. If you remember back to school, we want a 3-degree glide slope. Okay, and this is your height above touchdown. This is your MDA. We need to solve for X. Okay, to solve for X, it's the tangent of 3 degrees, and then so it's tangent equals opposite over adjacent. So you'd end up solving for X here. That's how they end up getting these numbers. In general,
you have to have one answer. So they always pick the approach plates are for the lowest.
Yes.
The altitude, the AGLs.
Yes, they always use the lowest.
Okay. So what if you're not the lowest? What if you're the highest?
Perfect. So glad you asked that. Now you've got to calculate it yourself. So, or there are times when there's no VDP depicted. It's actually really simple. There's a simple way to remember this. It's called Gus wears a hat. Okay? Gus wears a hat. Okay? So you got Gus, and he wears a hat. Okay? That's the easy way to remember this. Gus wears a hat. And what that is this is height above touchdown. Okay? So we'd put 415 in here. And this is just, it's very close. It's not perfectly accurate, but close enough. And then the Gus is your glide slope times 100. So it would be 415 divided by 300 for a 3-degree glide slope. Okay, if you wanted a 3.5 degree glide slope for whatever reason, you would do 350 underneath. Now, if you're going to do this math, it's actually going to come out to 1.3, even though that approach plate has it listed as 1.2. And that's because this is a very close WAG. It's not 100%. But if there's no VDP listed, or you're using a VDP for a higher altitude, this is going to get you in the ballpark that you need. Gus wears a hat.
Okay.
All right.
So am I going to have to know that for my check ride?
No, you won't. You won't need to know that. You're going to need to know that if you ever really want to calculate the VDP because you're going somewhere that doesn't have one. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen so that I can show you some of what we're talking about. What different approaches we have. Okay, so this, not that one, not that one, this one. Here is an example of an approach that does not have a VDP depicted. So this is also, now here's the scary part. When a VDP is not depicted, it's because there's an obstacle in the way. Okay, so they can't, it's not like, hey, there's no VDP, everything's great. It actually means that there is an obstacle that is not necessarily in the way, but it is in the way of their normal safety zone. So it's only safe if you actually have visual to descend. You have to be at your MDA, and you have to be able to see the runway, because there's going to be something that they couldn't necessarily publish. There's like 3 different reasons, but that's the primary reason that a VDP may not be listed. So on this one, you can see there's several heights above touchdown: 344, 460, 420, 424, 500, and there's no VDP. So if you wanted to pick a VDP, you would use Gus wears a hat as your ballpark to come up with the distance. Now that distance is distance from the end of the runway, not DME. This is a good example here because you've got the DME here is 22.1 and 23.4. Obviously, when you do Gus wears a hat, you're going to get a number like 1.3. So it's 1.3 from the runway. So you'd have to do that math as to where or not 1.3, whatever the math comes out to be here. Let's just say the answer was 1 mile, right? If the answer was 1 mile, you would have to figure out that 1 mile from 23.4 DME. So you'd subtract that, and it would be 22.4 DME would be your VDP.
Okay.
You guys following me on there?
I think so.
Okay. You can ask questions. You don't have to understand it. I can get the whiteboard out and do some more. Let's see. You can see right there. I'm going to get you even more in the weeds here for a second. Do you see right above the 1320 in the plan view next to 22.1 DME where it says 3.7 degree over the TCH of 45?
Yep.
All right. So they're actually calculating the safe angle. The safe visual descent angle to the runway is actually 3.17, not 3 degrees. Okay. You're probably not going to get asked that either. But that's how they calculated it, the safety zone there, at 45. And you know what TCH stands for?
No.
Threshold crossing height. So if you were on the perfect glide slope to that runway, they're calculating that visual descent altitude, or I'm sorry, the visual angle. I'm getting, the visual angle, that angle right there, for a crossing height of 45. Now look up in the top left corner where it says the VGSI angle is 3.0 for a threshold crossing height of 30. So what that's saying is there's PAPIs or VASIs that are shooting up at a 3 degree angle, but that would only get you a threshold crossing height of 30 feet.
Okay, got it close.
Kind of close, yeah. But what they're really trying to tell you is if you're on the perfect descent angle, you're not going to be exactly on the VASIs or PAPIs either. But the VASIs and PAPIs are going to be safe. It's just going to be a different threshold crossing height. And it's just something they're required to publish is that threshold crossing height.
You know, at what plane is this? I want to look this up.
Okay, this is, let's see, KCN VOR DME runway 13. Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. On this one, you can see they're using a 2.8 degree visual descent angle, or VDA, for a threshold crossing height of 54. But the VASIs and PAPIs have a 3 degree angle, but that gives you also a threshold crossing height of 54. So these things are, you know, we go into all these details and they do all this very specific math, but when we're in the air, they're going to be very, very close. It's important to know because if you're setting your power setting, especially in the faster airplanes, if you're setting your power setting and you're setting in a very specific foot per nautical mile descent or foot per minute descent, you're going to want to know these things. But again, that's kind of high level. You don't need to know the math as to how they get these things or how they apply these things. What's important is knowing where the MDA is and how the VDP relates to the runway. So on this one, this is Wiley Post. If you wanted to look this one up, this is PWA's VOR runway 17 left. And I picked this one because there's not a bunch of step downs. Because what I wanted to talk about here is that, like I said earlier, you can do dive and drive, right? So technically, when you pass the final approach fix, you could go all the way down to 1660 and then drive forward. All right.
Yep.
You could descend prior to the VDP, right? So they're saying you're safe down to 1660. As soon as you see the runway, you can go to the runway. Now, your angle isn't going to be correct. You're going to come in drug in. It's not going to be normal. You know, you're looking for that normal 3 degree glide slope that you've practiced over and over again. But also, that 1660 is there because there is some kind of obstacle out there. But if you can acquire it visually, you can go around it. Okay, so once you hit your VDP, the same applies. Just because you're at your VDP does not mean that there are no obstacles on your way to the runway. You must still be able to visually avoid any obstacles that are in there. And if you look now up in the profile view, you can see that they've listed several little towers down here where that would be. So they're actually going to show the towers out there, or obstacles, and not necessarily towers, probably buildings, but they're going to be out there. Otherwise, they couldn't publish this at all. If you stay at 1660, you're not going to hit anything. Okay, that's why you don't go below it unless you have visual. But once you have visual, you have to stay visual, and you still have to be able to avoid anything that's in the way. All right, so then the next big question is, what happens if I get past the VDP? Can I descend to the runway? And this is where you're going to see a lot of discussion on the forums about if you don't have the runway at the VDP, you go to your mission approach point and go. You can't stay. You can't stay going down to the runway. But actually, what the AIM says. Now there's an advisory circular. I'm going to swap what I'm sharing here so I can talk about this advisory circular. Okay, this is the advisory circular. It is 9179A, and you know what? I didn't check to make sure that was the most current. So before I make a fool of myself, I'm going to search for it. You always want to make sure that you're using the most up-to-date stuff. Actually, I want to take off the A and go to the FAA site. And it looks like A is still the active one. So mitigating the risk of a runway overrun upon landing. And there's some information in this advisory circular on how not to land and go off the end of the runway. Now, in the little airplanes that we're typically flying, it's not going to be a big deal. But this is something that's worth skimming because the guiding regulation is 91-175 that talks about MDA and when you can go below it, okay? And this is where the arguments come in. And it says, except as provided in 91-176 of this chapter, where a decision altitude or decision or MDA is applicable, no pilot may operate below the authorized MDA or continue an approach below the authorized decision height, decision altitude, unless the aircraft is continuously in a position from which a descent to landing on the intended runway can be made at a normal rate of descent using normal maneuvers and for operations conducted under 121 and Part 135, unless that descent rate will allow touchdown to occur within the touchdown zone of the runway. So what is that saying to us? It's saying, well, you are not allowed to go below MDA unless you can make a normal rate of descent and touchdown in the touchdown zone. But no, the touchdown zone part is for Part 121 and Part 135. So if you're a Part 121 and Part 135 airplane and you're flying commercial or, flying as with your commercial certificate, now you have to worry about that touchdown zone. If you're in a little airplane and you get to the VDP and you don't see the runway yet, or it's hazy and you're like, I don't know if I can avoid the buildings or the obstacles, I can't really see and avoid those buildings yet, and you keep driving forward on your MDA, if the runway pops out and you're at a 10,000 foot runway and you can see the runway remaining markers, or hey, I just passed over the captain's bars, that's only 1,000 feet down, I know that I still have 9,000 feet, you can very easily get the airplane on the ground. You got to be really careful to not just dive down because the picture is going to be looking differently. But it's not saying that you can't, after the VDP, then go down to the runway. And that's the part that people seem to argue about a lot. It talks down here about missed approach, and this is where it comes back up again. For missed approach, you have to go missed approach when the aircraft is being operated below MDA and you don't meet the requirements of the paragraphs above. Okay, it's saying the same thing. And it's really talking about, and there's this other part, and I'm not going to read through the whole reg for you, but I definitely want you to go read through this, that 91-175 when it comes to VDP and MDA, and why that might be possible. And so, of course, it's not going to say anywhere that you can't land after the VDP because they don't always publish VDP. VDP is not a required point. Okay, so that's where you get to be a pilot and go, is this safe? Now, if you're going to a 3,000 foot runway and you go past your VDP and then you see the runway, it might not be the smartest thing to do. You might want to just go missed approach and get out of there. All right, what questions do you have about that stuff?
That all makes sense to me.
Perfect. I'm going to bring this back up.
It sounds more like it's a guideline for general aviation.
Well, not just general aviation, because like I said, there's sometimes VDPs not published on approaches that 121 and 135 aren't flying, right? So they still have to just be able to make a normal landing. So they might be on a higher approach and they have to calculate their own VDP anyway. So the VDP that's depicted on the diagram isn't going to be right for them, right? So it is a guideline for just about everybody. But if you do get significantly past the published VDP or a VDP that you calculate, your chances of making a normal landing will go down.
Okay.
That's really what it's talking about.
Safety feature.
It's safety. Yeah, it's an awareness. I wouldn't even say it's safety. It's an awareness. It's for specifically for pilots to have awareness because, like I said, you could do dive and drive. And if you dive down and then just start driving forward and you're actually in the weather, you're just sitting there thinking, "Oh my goodness, where am I supposed to be in space before I see this runway? And how close am I to the missed approach point?" And so it gives you that situational awareness of, "Oh, I just passed my VDP. It's unlikely that I'm about to see the runway. I better get in the mode to go missed approach." You see, or if you're before the published VDP, you go, "Oh, okay, hey, I broke out the weather before the VDP. All right, cool. Now I have some time to figure out what's going on around me because I don't have to go missed approach immediately." That's the idea there. It's a situational awareness piece.
Okay.
So then the last part here is the actual missed approach. So where is the missed approach point is also very different on a lot of the approaches. So here you can see at Wiley Post, the missed approach point is halfway down the runway, essentially. Your missed approach point is the VOR. So you're going to be driving well past that VDP point. You're going to be seeing the runway for a long time. The runway is, let's see, this is runway 17 left. This runway is 7,000 feet long, okay? Yeah, the VOR is really far down there. If you drive all the way to the VOR and then see the runway, I don't recommend trying to land, okay? but if you get just a little bit past the threshold and then you're like, "Oh, you know what? I think I can make this," just be really smart and be careful because all the visual clues are going to be very different. You're not going to see the approach bars, the piano keys. You're not going to see the piano keys. You're not going to see all the stuff that's normal, but it is still legal to get yourself down there. Just be really careful about it, unless, of course, you're 121 or 135. So then this approach here, so that one was a non-precision only, which is why it only had one thing on there. On this one here, you can see this is a precision and non-precision approach. And it has the little missed approach markings way back here, but then also lists this IEFE at 1.6. That's because this, can you see my pointer on there? Probably not. Maybe.
Yes.
Okay. So where those marks, those hash marks start, that's actually when somebody on the ILS meets the decision altitude. So that's 776. Okay. So if you're on the localizer, if you're doing the non-precision, you're going to be at 920 or higher instead. So that's where that VDP is higher than that. You would end up driving it forward if you don't see the runway. Then at 1.6, that is your missed approach point.
So is the VDP calculated for the localizer approach?
Yes, because remember, VDP is only for non-precision.
Right.
So the VDP is calculated for the localizer.
Not for the circling.
Not for the circling. Yes, it is the non-precision straight-ins.
Okay.
Yep. Because if you're circling, you wouldn't be descending there. You have to circle first.
But you can do a straight in on a circling approach, right?
Yeah. Yes, but why? Are you saying like I just want to stay higher?
I'm saying I just think you can if you can do it safely.
No, I know, but the reason that you're doing a circling approach, like on this one, if I'm doing the circle, it's because this is a precision approach to runway 18, but the winds are significantly tailwind, so I would need to circle all the way around to runway 36. It would be the only reason I'm on that circling approach. So I wouldn't have a VDP because now you're essentially in a pattern.
Yes. Yeah. I wouldn't say that there's a reason to, other than you can.
Right, but if you requested the circling approach from an ATC, they're going to expect you to go around. They're not going to expect you to do that straight in.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so if you say I'd like the circling approach, they're going to go, okay, circle to runway 36. So they're not going to. You're not going to be doing the straight in there unless you.
Okay.
So the circle is specifically to go to another runway. With one caveat, there are some approaches that are circling only, and it's because even though it looks like a straight in, it's off. It's cantered off by 30 degrees. So as soon as that straight in approach has a 30-degree angle to it, it has to be called a circling approach.
Got it.
So that would be the only time where you're on a circling approach, even though it's a straight in.
What if there weren't any approaches for the other end of the runway?
Well, then you can request the circle to the other runway.
Okay.
So I wish I had an example for that. Let's just say, for sake of argument, on this runway, this was a localizer only, and the only data down in the bottom was circling. If you just requested the localizer to runway 18, you don't have to say runway 18 circling. You just have to say the runway to 18. But if you said I want to go 18 circle 36, I need to find it. I need to find a sample of this one. Okay, here's one. Let me see if I can get it open in a new tab. Not sure how successful this is going to be. That's probably really small. Not sure if I can get that bigger. All right, well, this is Chicago SHA. See how it is a VOR GPS? No, this is not a good example either because it is actually a circle-only approach. If it's a circling-only approach, it's not going to have a runway on it. It's going to have a letter like this. Okay, it's going to have VOR GPS Alpha. It won't say VOR runway 18. It'll just be VOR Alpha, and you're going to have to tell them what runway you're going to, is essentially what it comes down to. I'm sorry I didn't have that one ready.
That's quite all right.
Okay, so where to read more about all of what we just talked about is in the AIM. It is the AIM, Chapter 5, Section 4, and it's Section 4-5, but the page is 5-4-19. Okay, and it is paragraph H, I, J, and K is everything I talked about today. And hopefully now that I've explained some of this with some pictures, when you read through that, you're going to, oh, that's what she was talking about. That makes sense. It actually going to tell you some other scary stuff, like if there is no shading, that means there's an obstacle in the way. It's really interesting that I learned that today. I was like, oh, in the absence of things, that means that there's obstacles because they couldn't publish it within their tolerances. That's why the see and avoid part is so important. If you're above MDA, you're going to be fine. There's no obstacles. But once you go below MDA, you've got to be able to see because they might not meet the requirements.
What do you mean the shading? If there's
see how there is shading on this approach right here?
On the glide slope?
Yep.
Yep.
That shading, they said in there that means that there's no obstacles in the way whatsoever. But if there is no shading, I don't think I have one. Sometimes there's ILSs that don't have shading. but there's no shading. It means that they couldn't publish that. So, but that's in that AIM. And then one last resource for you guys is I wanted to just let you know, I put this website together. It's not, you don't have to pay for it or anything. It's aviaspire.com, and then under training and then resources, this is a link to every official FAA source that you could use. I know a lot of times people are like, oh, buy a FAR, buy an AIM, it might be out of date, or buy the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. But if you come to this page here, these are all linked directly to the official FAA website. And so whenever they update something, it'll be updated here automatically. It'll just take you right to the most recent thing. So if you wanted to go to the most recent AIM, you could use this. And then you don't have to like look all over the internet. I just made a resource. And it's also got chart information stuff and airport NOTAMs and weather and winds. I was just tired of having to search the internet for all my important aviation stuff. So I put this together. So it's Aviaspire, which is like aspire to be an aviator, aviaspire.com/resources, if you want to go directly there. But that's where I pulled the AIM from, because it comes right off the FAA website.
Awesome.
And then I think I got a little, there was one last thing I did want to talk about for MDA, or I'm sorry, for missed approach. So if you're on this approach here and you're at 1660 and you get past your VDP and you can't see it and you know I'm going to go missed approach, do you have to stay at 1660 all the way to the VOR?
No, you can climb in altitude, but you cannot turn off of it until you pass your missed approach point.
Perfect, yes. So there's really no sense in just staying at 1660. If you know for sure you're going missed approach, start the climb, start your cleanup if you've got stuff to clean up, and then when you're, just be nice and calm and slow about it, but you are just going to give yourself a factor of safety there because you've already started that climb, and now this one I think is still PWA. So this is Oklahoma. There's nothing out there but buildings, but you might be in the mountains and you want to make sure you're at the right place before you start turning. So that's exactly right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.
Happy Memorial Day weekend.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, you too. Bye.